Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as 50 hours, but hey, it's something. Now, this episode is going to be interesting, not necessarily due to the topic in question, though I will admit the topic is a rather interesting one that I have kind of wanted to tackle for a little bit. But this one is more important because this episode is going to come out on my 23rd birthday. Woohoo, hooray, I guess. I have no plans. I don't know if I will have any plans because apparently the air quality is still not in the best at the moment, apparently. We going back in the orange down here, apparently. I don't know if it will be good by the time my birthday shows up. And even then, I don't know if there will be any plans. Could be, could not be, I don't know. Honestly, if I had a choice, I would spend that day basically working on more stuff for you all. Because legitimately, basically this is the only thing keeping me sane in the world. And judging by some of these news stories, oh boy, I'm definitely going to need some of that. But before we get into that, let's get right into the news. First, we're going to be doing another Mexican presidential election update because the opposition has finally started their process of choosing their nominee. And, well, there's a little bit of a here and there thing in regards to the opposition. For starters, I don't even necessarily know if the opposition is going to be the same opposition that it was, because apparently there was a technical change in name in the opposition. Originally it was Va por Mexico, or It Goes Through Mexico. Now, apparently the one that is being floated now is something called the Frente Amplio por Mexico, or the Broad Front of Mexico. It still contains the PAN, the PRI, and the PRD, but I'm going to take a wild guess and say that maybe the reason why they changed it is because they're still holding out hope that MC will join in the coalition. Because again, they still stating that they fully intend to go in the election solo, but the people in the Broad Front of Mexico are saying they really want the MC to get involved in their massive anti-AMLO coalition, and they worry that if, they're saying one thing, but they're kind of implying something else. They're saying that if the MC goes alone in this election, the election will be incredibly polarized. But here's what they actually mean. If you guys don't join us, then our coalition is losing, because in the polls that have been conducted with the idea that the MC goes alone and then goes against the Va por Mexico or Broad Front for Mexico and the Together We Make History coalition, there are a lot of scenarios where the MC gets second place. Although I think the ones where they get second place, it usually depends on their nominee. I think usually it's Colosio who gets second, which is why the Va por Mexico has been desperately trying to get Colosio to join in the idea of forming a national coalition against AMLO. At this point, Colosio is probably the only person who is not in Morena who actually has a chance of being president. In order of likelihood of getting the presidency in 2024, it's Morena, then MC, then the PRI or PAN, then PT or PVEM, then some force that we have no clue about yet, an independent or whatever else, and then all the way at the bottom, the PRD. And that's why the PRD is involved in all of these shenanigans, because this is their only chance at remaining relevant. But it ain't lasting. Even when the PRD leads the coalition, they fail massively, so it's just like, there is literally no point. I predict that by the end of the next presidential election cycle, if the PRD is not disbanded, then it will literally be like a ghost of anything of its former self. But anyways, back to this process. What is this process? Because this process is going to be a little different than what we're kind of used to. You see, since they have to involve all these other parties, they can't rely on the whole dedazo method. And I think this is going to be interesting. This is probably going to be the first presidential election where the dedazo is not a factor in any of the parties. So what they plan to do is a 3-stage thing. Stage 1 is going to be conducted on July 4th of 2023, where the presidential candidates of those parties, the PAN, the PRI, and the PRD, will have to register with the three of them and the broader Electoral Alliance Commission. They will be announced, and then they will have to quickly try to circulate support amongst a lot of people. They have to gain the support of 15,000 people and must be registered through a platform enabled by the Broad Front. And after they get a sufficient amount of supporters, they will then be able to move on to round 2. The second stage, the people who complete the first stage will participate in a major public forum and will be subject to public opinion polls. And after they go through that, the top 3 people in the polls will then move on to the last round, where 5 forums will be held, and then they will be conducting more polls on who is popular. Then on September 3rd, they will announce the winner of those sets of polls, but that's not where it ends. They will then go back to the people who registered with the PRI, the PAN, and the PRD in the first round to participate in all of these forum posts and polls to begin with, and then they will ask them, what do you think of our nominee? And then they will get a chance to vote on whether they accept this nominee or deny this nominee. And then that result will be considered half of these results for the last round, with the other half being those aforementioned polls that led to this person to be here to begin with. And then, after they calculate the total results from both of these things, they will then fully announce who is the nominee of this broad front. Now, not everybody is too enthused with this way of handling things. The first and most prominent person to call out this process is Lily Tellez, who was actually considered the front runner for this race for the primary process for the broad front, who stated that this process would be incredibly unfair to a lot of candidates and was really confusing. So she decided to announce that she wouldn't run for the broad front nomination. And as of now, the only person who has formally announced that they are running for the broad front nomination is a prominent PAN representative by the name of Xochitl Galvez Ruiz, who's been a very hefty critic of AMLO. There are some other people who have been floated as potential candidates. The biggest one is Santiago Creel, who I think most people generally agree is probably one of the PAN's frontrunners. I've noticed that Ricardo Anaya has sort of disappeared from the lineup, so I think Ricardo Anaya is officially out. Then there's Enrique de la Madrid of the PRI. There's Claudia Ruiz Massieu of the PRI. And this guy, funniest one, Miguel Angel Mancera, who is a member of the PRD. I think it's funny that the PRD still is trying to pretend that they're relevant. It's just funny to see it. But hey, we'll still be keeping an eye on this race while we wait for the 2024 presidential election to gain steam. We'll have to talk about that one instead. But speaking of presidential elections, another presidential election update that happened, Guatemala. Oh boy, this one blew my mind what happened. Okay, so early on in the election, people were looking at the results, and one of the things I saw when I was looking at the results, I was a little flabbergasted by, because there was a candidate who was in second place that I was actually oh, this guy's actually pretty cool, but I'm not going to hold my breath on him just yet. He's kind of cool, but I don't think he's going to keep this lead. And then when I woke up the next morning to look at the results again, he maintained that lead. So now the runoff has gotten a massive upset in the race, because instead of what people thought was going to happen with Zuri Rios and Sandra Torres as the two people, it seems that the people who are going on to the presidential runoff to be held on August 20th will be Sandra Torres and Bernardo Arevalo. Now, if you remember, I was a huge supporter of Thelma Cabrera's candidacy, but in the fact that she was kicked off the ballot unconstitutionally, I basically said, well, of the remaining candidates, Bernardo Arevalo was one of the best ones, and he got a massive upset. And his party also got a massive upset, because many people thought that his party was saying that in the election, they were expecting to get at most 9 seats. They ended up getting 23. And judging by these results, because it looks like the UNE, which is Sandra Torres' party, lost 24 seats, I'm going to take a wild guess and say maybe that is one of the reasons why they lost. This election was a major upset for a lot of reasons, because, again, Semilia and Bernardo Arevalo, like, polling-wise, they were not expected to do hot. But they did incredibly well. But there is one reason why they might have done incredibly well. Well, actually, 2 reasons. One, polls seem to have been not in their favor, which is a thing that I point out with Thelma Cabrera, where polls seem to indicate that Thelma Cabrera would do terribly, but then sure enough, she ended up doing really well back in the election where they allowed her to participate in. But, like, the polls seem to have been incredibly off, because all the candidates that they expected to be, like, in the runoff with Sandra Torres, Edmund Mullet, and Zuri Rios, they didn't do so hot at all. Like, Zuri Rios, she ended up getting, like, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. She got 6th place. Armando Castillo wasn't even considered, like, a primary candidate, and he got more votes than her. Again, it seems to be they overpolled the people who were likely to vote for Zuri Rios and underpolled the people who were not going to vote for a left-wing candidate. But there is one more reason why this race is interesting and why this result has sort of been seen the way it is. Let's just go over the vote totals of the 2 candidates. Okay, so Bernardo Arevalo got 649,080 votes, or 15.61%. And Sandra Torres got 20.88% of the vote, or 868 and 124 votes. Notice how neither of these candidates got a majority. Like, and let's just briefly look over the 2019 election, just so we can kind of understand this, like, kind of understand how things went the last time. The last time, Sandra Torres got 1 million votes in the first round. So right off the bat, you could see there was not that much enthusiasm. Like, enthusiasm was not really doing so hot in this election. And that gets even more special when you notice the results for blank or invalid votes. The results for blank and invalid votes are 956,413 votes and 385,014 votes. Doing the math, it's 1,341,427 people in Guatemala who made the decision to reject both, well, not just both, all of the candidates and have their ballots thrown away. Yeah, like, wow. The fact that that is a thing is just kind of impressive, especially considering, like, if you look at the actual results, like, I know people get obsessed with electoral maps. By the way, that could potentially be a video in and of itself, where I sort of crap on the idea of electoral maps and this weird obsession we have with them now. But anyways, like, the fact that that is a thing that can happen, like, is kind of perplexing. Now, you might be wondering, what happens next? Well, I'll just say this. Sandra Torres does not have a good record in the runoff election. Every time she's gotten to a runoff, she has not done well. People really do not like her. Hopefully that will continue with Bernardo Arevalo. Granted, she usually has to run to a candidate to her right, but this time she has to run against a candidate to her left. And I have seen a lot of people say, like, the pink tide is coming to Guatemala. It's like, no. Like, I mean, maybe, but no. The candidate of the pink tide was Thelma Cabrera. Bernardo Arevalo, great candidate. I do endorse him, and I do think that he would make a much better president. Maybe he can be considered part of the pink tide. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, Thelma Cabrera was more of the candidate of the pink tide, and hopefully Bernardo Arevalo does better and wins in the next round. Speaking of good things that have happened in a Latin American country, Jair Bolsonaro is banned from running for office until 2030. Far-right former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro was barred Friday from running for office again until 2030 after a panel of judges concluded that he abused his power and cast unfounded doubts on the country's electronic voting system. This decision upends the 68-year-old's political future and likely erases any chance for him to regain power. Now, technically, he does have a path to get power, because 2030 is an election year for Brazil. It's not the next election year. The next election year is 2026. But many people are saying, like, basically, by the time that he's, like, by the 2030, he'll probably be too old to actually continue a political career. Even, like, if he is alive by that point. I bring this story up not only because really good news, but also to show off what an actual functioning nation and judicial system can do under these circumstances. Literally every single politician who was involved with the January 6th insurrection, its planning, its execution, etc., should not be allowed to run for any future public office. They should have been removed from their public office and just whatever. Like, they should have been removed from the public office and should be barred from running for any future election. Period. But on one end, Democrats are too spineless to even do anything remotely. Like, when Trump and all these other people, when they get, like, punished for, like, literally the tiniest things, all of a sudden, they're screeching like banshees. Like, these fucking, like, insane redneck idiots are just, like, screaming like actual banshees for, like, Trump literally, like, stole secret documents and just kept them hidden in boxes in his home. And it's just like, they're like screaming like, they're persecuting my man. It's like, shut up. Why are you so stupid? And why do the Democrats have to literally wait for literally every other thing to do it? Like, they got so humiliated with the Russiagate scandal that it's just like, they're too afraid to do anything anymore. It's like, I hate it. Like, this is another reason why Russiagate is probably, like, crappy, bad for the Democrats, because since their embarrassment due to the fact that Russiagate didn't lead to this massive network of, like, actual, like, direct connections with Trump and Putin and, like, verifiable 100% undoubtedly evidence of election collusion on that regard, due to that, they apparently will not do anything remotely to actually hold Trump accountable for his actions. They are too afraid for perceived future embarrassment that they won't actually do what's right. Literally every single court case and every single legal filing against Trump after that point has been just objectively, verifiably true, but since they screwed up Russiagate so bad that now every time people see that, they just go, witch hunt. It's like, I genuinely hate that is what has happened at this point. That we can't even persecute literally guilty people for doing a thing that literally almost murdered a ton of politicians and literally almost overthrew the government. The fact that we can't do anything about that because the Democrats are too afraid to do anything is just absolutely infuriating. Now, this is where we transition to the next news stories, because the Supreme Court recently pushed for a ton of things. Like, they recently did some decisions on a lot of upcoming things. And just because I got so heated in that part, we'll start off with the best one. We'll start off with the best decision that they made. I'm probably going to include all of the decisions into one big section because I kind of just am lazy. But anyways, first, they ruled against giving state legislatures unchecked control over federal elections. Now, you may or may not know this, but many Republicans were trying to push for something called the independent state legislature theory. Independent state legislature theory was a legal theory and an interpretation of the Constitution that said that the Constitution delegated the authority to regulate federal elections to state legislatures, not state courts, not governors, or not any other governing body, not the federal government or anything else. It was the state legislatures that had the ultimate say in how federal elections would be conducted in their state. This wasn't something that popped out of nowhere. Apparently, this was used during the 2000 election regards to Florida, saying that Florida ultimately had the final say in how their election would be conducted. Now, what happened was the North Carolina Supreme Court ruled that North Carolina's congressional districts were drawn very unfavorably to Democrats in the next election, ruling that they were just essentially trying to gerrymander it, and they were like, no, you can't do that. So then the leader of the North Carolina Republican Party, Tim Moore, then just went, no, we're going to go to the federal court to try and make sure that we have the final say. And they said, no, they're right. You're legitimately trying to gerrymander this thing. So, yeah. And I think there were also worries that potentially state legislature theory would then be used for more federal elections, but ultimately the Supreme Court chose that that was not the case. And that's apparently the only good one that has been conducted of these recent SCOTUS cases. So the next one was the Supreme Court killed Joe Biden's student relief plan. I'll just read a little bit of it here because I don't really have much else to say on this one. The Supreme Court on Friday invalidated President Joe Biden's student loan debt relief plan, meaning that a long-delayed proposal intended to implement a campaign trail promise will not go into effect. Justices divided 6-3 on ideological lines, ruled in one of two cases that the program was an unlawful exercise of presidential power because it had not been explicitly approved by Congress. Which is weird considering, according to this, it technically did pass Congress in a 208 to 199 vote, but it said it passed in 2020, so I'm going to take a wild guess and say that they're going under the technicality that it wasn't approved for this legislative session, so by that logic, they should not use that. That it would have to be voted on again in order for Biden to officially approve this plan. This sucks, but most people expected that this was going to be the case, and I really don't have much else to say because I don't really know that much about student debt or whatever. The next case that is bigger was that the Supreme Court ended affirmative action, drawing criticism from Biden and Harris. The Supreme Court issued a divided ruling on the pair of challenges to affirmative action policies at Harvard and the University of North Carolina, with potential implications across higher education and beyond. The court ruled against the programs, saying that in the majority opinion written by Chief Justice Roberts, that the system in place lacked sufficiently focused and measurable objectives, warranting the use of race, unavoidably employ race in a negative manner, involve racial stereotyping, lack of meaningful endpoints. Those admissions programs cannot be reconciled with the guarantees of the Equal Protection Clause. But the court did not rule out race entirely in admission programs, adding nothing prohibits universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected the applicant's life, so long as the discussion is concretely tied to a quality of character or unique ability that the particular applicant can contribute to the university. And conservatives basically rushed to point out this fact, like, aha, see, systemic racism is over, because one of their big things is that they make the claim that affirmative action is racist because it helps minorities. And this is something that I've been meaning to say for a bit. I don't know if I've said it already on the show, but I definitely tweeted it. Follow me on Twitter. I actually interact with my tweets, maybe at one point. I don't know. At Pluribus Unum YT. I'm staying on Twitter until it implodes, and I'm not starting another social media account. So here's my very big hot take on affirmative action. Every single argument against affirmative action is 100% racist. And people who are against affirmative action prove that to be the case every single time they argue against affirmative action. One of the biggest and most prevalent arguments that I always see in regards to affirmative action is this: the claim that qualified applicants for whatever, a job, a university, or whatever else, are being overlooked to go to unqualified applicants of color. And it wasn't until I heard someone make this argument in the debate that I legitimately realized just right then, like, oh, that's why this is racist. Because every single time they use that argument, they always automatically assume that the African American or any other minority applicant is underqualified for the position, and that real qualified candidates are overlooked in favor of them. Why do you automatically assume that they are underqualified? That has never been the case with affirmative action. The point is, you get people who are both qualified for the position, but you pick the minority candidate because of the verifiably, objectively true fact that applicants of color in every single field get rejected overwhelmingly in favor of white people, even if they are underqualified. It's the same study that everybody does again, where they take two people the exact same applications, one named Jamal and one named Gregory. Then they send those applications in. Jamal never gets a callback, and then Greg gets a ton of callbacks. But then they do it again, where they have Jamal go up against someone else, David. David is super underqualified, but David still gets more return calls. It is literally undoing racism that is being conducted. And this mindset overwhelmingly drives people insane. Like, even POC people legitimately have this outlook in their head where people who are minorities advocate against affirmative action because they think, no, I don't want to get this job just because of my race. I don't want to go to this school because of my race. What I want is to earn my position here. It's like, dude, you're not understanding. You did earn this position. You earned it 100%. But these guys are not going to let you in because of your brown skin or what's between your legs. They're not going to let you in because they're racist or sexist or anti-Semitic or anything else. This is going to be a weird tangent, but there's a freaking George Lopez episode that goes into the idea of affirmative action, where George Lopez is going to get hired for this very good job because he's being mistreated at his current job, and he's got this better job and everything else. And then they go, the only reason why we're hiring you is because you're Latino. And he's like, wait, what? So you don't think I can do the job? And they're like, no, we think you 100% can do the job, but we also need a Latino. And it's like, and then George Lopez is offended. He's like, how dare you? And then he goes away, and then he goes to his workers, his old bosses, and he says, like, hey, guys, I was about to quit. You should appreciate me more. And they're like, oh, okay, George. And then he says, by the way, if you didn't hire me because I was a Latino, and they're like, no, if there was a white guy who could do your job, we'd hire him in a second. And he's like, thanks. And it's like, George, you were gonna get a better paying job, and they accepted that you were qualified for the job. Your race played very minimal in their hiring. This is what affirmative action does. Like, it takes a person who would never get this opportunity in any sort of system, but they give them this opportunity. This programs of affirmative action were literally started specifically because of this thing, of the United States systemic racism. And I think another thing that proved how verifiably racist that the people who are against affirmative action was in regards to Ketanji Brown Jackson, where many people were very mad that Joe Biden specifically stated that he wanted to appoint a black woman to the court. And they were saying how Ketanji Brown Jackson, she's super unqualified, she's a terrible candidate, she was only hired because of her race, blah, 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 and now they're even saying that she should probably be taken off the court now because she was only put on because of her race. But it's like, Ketanji Brown Jackson is literally the most qualified person currently sitting on the court. Literally. There's this, I'll retweet it right now, and you can see it, but it shows like the political careers of all of the Supreme Court justices. Let's go it over. Okay, education, public high school. Only 4 went to a public high school. Ketanji Brown Jackson, Stephen Breyer, Sam Alito, and Elena Kagan. Ivy League Law School, all but Amy Coney Barrett went there. Supreme Court clerkling, all but Thomas Alito and Sotomayor. Public defender, Ketanji Brown Jackson is the only one. Sentencing Commission, Ketanji Brown Jackson and Stephen Breyer are the only ones. District Judge, Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sotomayor were the only ones. Court of Appeals judges, all but Kagan were Court of Appeals judges. Literally, she has every single qualification to get on the court. But conservatives pretend that she's the least qualified person on the court because she's a black woman. Oh yeah, and another thing to prove that they're racist. Every single time they bring up, and I think I technically am also a little bit guilty of this because of how I've been wording this argument, but a lot of them have stated, like every single time that they've been, like this whole day they've been doing all this, was talking about race, talking about, like they were talking about race, like, oh, a lot of black students are going to be kicked out of school now, haha. But the most prevalent people who are the biggest recipients of affirmative action programs are white women. Interesting. And the last SCOTUS case that was chosen which is the biggest blow, and I guess is the worst way to end Pride Month. The Supreme Court rules businesses can refuse services to LGBTQ customers. Businesses can refuse to serve same-sex couples if doing so would violate the owner's religious beliefs, the Supreme Court ruled on Friday. Literally a complete antithesis of the decision that happened in Obergefell, where we had that whole Kay Davis thing. But Kay Davis is really weirder, because Kay Davis was literally a public defender, or she was in a public position, but it was also this like debate of that like the gay wedding cakes. So basically, here's what happened. Absolute idiot bitch named Lori Smith, who is a Colorado web designer who primarily focuses on wedding websites, she stated that she went to the Supreme Court to say that she shouldn't be allowed to do one for gay like people, and the conservative majority of the court ruled 6-3 that she had the First Amendment right to do so. But the biggest thing that shows how stupid this is, and kind of how fucked up the court has become, and maybe how it has always been, I guess this is how it's always been, but one thing that kind of shows how stupid this is this. Her case literally had no merit, because no gay people asked her to make a site. Like, usually what happens is that there's an inciting incident in a SCOTUS case that would then lead to someone going to the Supreme Court. But she didn't even have an inciting case. What she had was a schizophrenic, insane, like, nightmare saying how God told her that she had to do this. And many people said, oh, this should have just been thrown out. Like, this legitimately should have been thrown out. But since the court has become so Republican-leaning, there's literally no point in, like, even thinking that they would handle this case logically. And you see why in every single politics anything, nobody cares about the Supreme Court. Because the Supreme Court is just this relic of dinosaurs. And unfortunately, Dems squandered their opportunities to actually do any reforms or anything of the sort. So, nothing much you can do now, except wait for the next one to fucking die. Oh wait, but actually that reminds me. Apparently, there was a rumor spreading online, and it was like in a reputable news source, that Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito are actually looking into retiring after the next election cycle. So yeah, keep that in mind for when you are going to cast your ballot. With that out of the way, let's move on to the main topic of this video, where I may or may not get as heated as I did in the like news stories. Probably not as much, because. But anyways, let's just get into it. If you're active in politics, you've heard the terms left wing and right wing. The terms and the spectrum associated with it have existed in some form or another since 1789. 234 years. Pretty impressive, if I do say so myself. As such, there's been a lot of changes, and it's had a wide variety of interpretations. You know, some people would say that left can range from things like progressive capitalists to, like, anarchism, or maybe what is considered right-wing is something like Christian democracy, or something ranging all the way to fascism. Then there are other ideologies that sort of fit into like right versus left, like anarcho-capitalism or maybe like state socialism, which are a bit different than how the terms originally came up. We all know the story of how the terms were originally formed. During the French Revolution, there were meetings of certain people in regards to how they view the monarchy. If you were sitting on the right side of the aisle, you were pro-monarchy. And if you're sitting on the left side of the aisle, you were considered anti-monarchist, or you were considered like a Republican. The parties in the United States have sort of shifted a little bit in regards to how they view, like the left and right political spectrum has sort of changed a little bit, and due to that, the parties have seemingly moved to and fro from each side. But generally, broadly, we all use and know the terms left and right, and roughly have the same idea regarding it. Like, if I were to genuinely ask, basically, for the most part, anybody, I just said, what do you think the left is and what do you think the right is? I think most people would genuinely get it, or if I said my definition of left and right, they would generally be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But due to all this, there's also been a little bit of a discussion and debate in how people view the terms right and left. Some people thinking that in order to show how right and left are, they need to put it on a spectrum, like a literal spectrum, like a line, right and left. to visualize it, because some people are visual learners. But there's some people who go, doing this like line graph of left and right kind of simplifies it a little too much, and it's a little hard to see. Because on one end, you get stuff like anarchism and communism. And on the other side, you get like anarcho-capitalism and fascism. So it's like, how do we necessarily fit everything in such... So they're like, okay, maybe we need like a new way to analyze how it works. So we introduced a lot of different types of political compasses. Like the Nolan chart, the political compass as we know it now, and other ways of interpreting left and right, like the horseshoe theory. For those who don't know what that is, the horseshoe theory is the theory that the far left and the far right are more similar than they are different. Like literally, that political spectrum is a horseshoe, but there are some people who also think that maybe just the idea of left and right are too simplification. Like those, it doesn't necessarily fit. That in the modern day and age, those two terms are outdated, and as such we need to grow past them. And this sentiment has grown a lot in recent years. Literally, go on Twitter right now, and then, quote, left and right are outdated, quote, enter, and you're going to see a ton of people say that exact same phrase or a variation of it. Now there's a term for people who think that way. What is it? Oh yeah, fucking idiots. And as such, that's what this episode's going to be about, where I'm going to try my best to explain why the terms left and right are not outdated, that they are in fact still very relevant to the modern day and age, that they are literally the best ways to describe our politics. And while we're at it, we're going to go over literally maybe some, gripes of the left-right political spectrum or whatever else. Now, I think the first thing we need to do is we need to address this. What the heck do the terms left and right even mean? Like I said, they've gone through a lot of evolution for the past 200-something years. Remember, they used to just be, are you for or against the monarchy? But that definition is an incredibly terrible one to use in the modern day. Canada, for example, by this logic, every party except for Bloc Québécois would be considered right-wing, because the Bloc Québécois is the only party that I think is explicitly against the British monarchy. NDP is the closest thing in the top three parties that is anti-monarchy, but it's basically like a tepid thing. And America, we don't have anybody who's actually advocating for a monarchy in the modern day, so I guess that means everybody in the United States is left-wing. So yeah, of course, that is a terrible way to use the left and right terminology today. And even then, they understood this. So after the monarchy sort of went bye-bye, they sort of changed how the terms left and right would sort of evolve into. And then that evolution would continue up until the modern day. And it continues to do so. In 20 years, or 50 years, I guess, the terms left and right might have might be very different than they are nowadays. But realistically, you'd have to wait at least 100 or so years before the terms left and right change. New political ideas entered the scene. We started getting people who advocated for something like communism. We got people who were advocating for things like civil rights or abolition of slavery, free markets, or whatever else. And now those ideas, when they became more mainstream, when most of us moved past sort of the idea of monarchies and God-given rights, and yeah, that's another thing, secularism and religion. But with all of these things being added, we started getting a little bit of too many cooks in the pot, where now we have a ton of different ways many people interpret left and right to mean, and all of them are wrong. And here are some of the ways that I can think of. First, stances on social issues. Your stances on social issues do not make you automatically left and right. Just because you do not have an incredibly harsh stance on LGBTQ rights does not automatically mean that you're left-wing on the issue. And on that same token, neither does your stance on economic issues. Christian Democrats and third positionists are pretty left-wing in regards to their economics, but that doesn't make them left-wing because of it, especially when you consider the fact that they have harder right social tendencies. Think about it. If you want to go by just this way or just this way, it's where do you put them? Do you put third positionists far right because of their social views, or do you put them far left based on their economic views? And we sort of get this like misnomer about it now, like, oh, the Republican voters are for X, Y, and Z economic issue, ergo, more Republican voters are left-wing than their compatriots. Like, I remember, like, in the immediate aftermath of the Bernie Sanders campaign, like 2017 and 2018, people were going like, oh, like 51% of Republicans are in favor of single payer. Ergo, Republicans are more left-wing than their compatriots. You know who else is in favor of single payer? Richard Spencer, Mike Cernovich, the head of freaking Newsmax. Alex Stein, the guy who went up to AOC and was like, she's a big booty Latina. Like, those people, they are in favor of single payer. And all those guys are freaking like neo-Nazis. You're going to sit there and go, oh, these guys are clearly left-wing. No, you'd be stupid to insinuate such. Another one, foreign policy. We'll go in depth about it in a bit, but a lot of people seem to think, oh, if you are against, like, if you're against the neoliberal, neoconservative foreign policy, then by definition, you are left-wing on foreign policy. The left-wing issue is non-interventionist. It's like, no, neither of that is true. Neither of those statements are true. Non-interventionism and stuff like anti-imperialism or radical pacifism, they're completely different forms of foreign policy. Again, we'll get more to it in a bit, but just because they both say we should pull out of wars does not mean that they have the same reasons or the same logistics for doing so. But the biggest one that is very much a complete, obvious, stupid way of analyzing left and right are big government versus small government. We hear this a lot with sort of a lot of mostly people from the right, where they claim that the left wants big, massive government. Meanwhile, the right wants teeny government. Yeah, anarchism and fascism would like a word with you. It's not whether or not the government is big or small, it's what you do with it. Like, I mean, and it's, again, mostly from the right, there's this big misinterpretation of what communism is. Like, people think, oh, communism is big government. It's like, no, it's not. Communism is literally supposed to be, at the end of the day, anarchist in its ideology, that the world will be run by workers, that they wouldn't need a government to do that. The government is supposed to just be like the transition period to actually get to what they want. But I hear you saying, okay. You said all these things that left and right are not. What are left-wing and right-wing actually? You see, most people don't actually look into the actual definitions of the two terms. And I was thinking of like going over like maybe my personal interpretation of it, but then actually when you look into the literal textbook definitions of left and right, you understand, oh, this just makes sense. This literally just makes the most sense. Like, literally anybody who understands politics would understand that this just makes the most sense. So, right-wing politics is defined as the belief that social orders and hierarchies are inevitable and/or beneficial to society and will fight to promote policies that advocate for social hierarchy and order. Meanwhile, the left believes that social orders and hierarchies are a detriment to society and will advocate for policies promoting equality and egalitarianism. That's it. Notice how there isn't like left-wing politics means to advocate for XYZ, or right-wing politics doesn't mean to advocate for XYZ. And there's a reason why. Because when you take those two definitions and think about them logistically, everything else fits. Like, everything else falls into place. Social issues. The left will fight for your equal rights regardless of your race, sex, gender, or any other immutable characteristics. They believe that society should help the downtrodden, the ones that have been historically oppressed by society. Meanwhile, the right fights against any form of social progress and wants to keep the social hierarchy that is currently in place. There's a funny Double D meme that has been spreading around online, Double D from the character from the show Ed and Eddie, where it's like a book where he says, it's like hard pills to swallow, and then he opens the book and it says, conservatives have never been the good guys in any single conflict. And that's true, because in every single form of social progress, conservatives are always the one that hold people back. LGBTQ rights, civil rights, slavery, apartheid, women's suffrage, conservatives are the ones that were arguing we need to keep things the way they are. and/or regress them to an earlier point in the timeline. Conservatives right now are openly point-blank arguing that we need to go backwards in times in regards to trans rights, gay rights, women's rights, and black people's rights. Like, literally, remember, there was a SCOTUS judge that literally said that they should probably look into the case about miscegenation. A lot of conservatives are openly talking about, like, man, when women got the right to vote, things got really crazy after women got the right to vote. Like, basically advocating for women to lose their suffrage. Conservatives and libertarians openly talk about how they want to repeal the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and it's just like guys, they literally want to go backwards. They're not even just trying to conserve what is currently in place now. They literally want to do reactionaryism and go backwards in time. Michael Knowles literally just said that he thinks that going back to 2012 is not far enough for him. He wants to go to 1212. Funny, considering he's on the same show as Ben Shapiro, and I'm pretty sure that how Jewish people were treated in 1212 is not really that good. And other issues like healthcare. The left thinks that everybody should have healthcare regardless of their economic status, whereas the right wing says no money, no insulin. And before you say, but wait, what about like Richard Spencer and the Nazis that you said? Well, you see, the reason why they advocate for single payer, they have an asterisk. Single payer for white people. They advocate for single payer for white people, or that it would help benefit white people. They specifically want to focus on white people in regards to this plan. And economics. Like, look, the economic outlooks of the left and right like just perfectly encapsulate this. Socialism is literally the economic system of equality. And capitalism is the economic system promoting hierarchy. Literally, just when you think about it for 2 seconds, those two basic terms and definitions fit very clearly. The left fights for equality and equity, meanwhile the right doesn't. And this has been the case since the French Revolution. Remember, the anti-monarchists were the ones who were advocating for people to be governed by the people, to be free. And the monarchists were advocating for literally one of the biggest hierarchies you can think of, a person anointed by their god to get unlimited power. And that outlook is still being used now. And we still use ideologies that rely heavily on that outlook. Progressivism, socialism, capitalism, freaking conservatism. We still use ideologies that have that outlook. And any sort of new political thought or new ideology that pops up, they still use the left-right spectrum for their ideology. They build off what currently exists now, and that just means that they just add to themselves the pile of left and right. Then you go, but I borrow aspects from the right and left. There's a term for that. It's called centrism, which still uses the left-right spectrum. You're just saying that you're not choosing a side. Just because you don't fit in the terms left and right does not mean that left and right are not good terms. Because not everybody uses left and right unilaterally. There are some people who are on the left that advocate for some rightward positions, and there are some people on the right who advocate for some leftward positions. Granted, most people do generally follow along party lines, but for the most part, there are people who can overlap in certain things. And we also got to take into consideration each country's different political spectrum, because each country has a slightly different political spectrum. You see, what is considered right and left in the United States is not necessarily what is right and left in the UK. The United States' political spectrum is vastly further to the right than, say, the United Kingdom. Whereas the United Kingdom has a political spectrum that has prominent socialists all the way to prominent, like, far-right, right-wing populists. The United States, our political spectrum revolves around, like, mostly welfare capitalist versus far-right, and every so often we get like a sprinkle of like social democrats and socialists in there. Meanwhile, Nepal, their right wing is like their political spectrum is a little bit more to the left than ours. Their left wing is like full-blown communism, and their right wing are basically social democrats with like one party that is actually right wing, a Hindu Vata party. But for the most part, their politics is mostly focused on the left side of the aisle. But still, broadly, those terms still work in these areas. For example, in the United States, a lot of the people who are the center-right, like capitalist type guys, they have sort of like this history with like some hints of center-left ideology in there and advocate for certain things that would benefit a lot of people on the bottom, pushing for certain forms of equality, particularly in regards to social issues, but also to a degree some economic issues. Like, for example, let's just think about it logistically. Can you actually think of when the left-wing politics in the Democratic Party began and ended? Like, when did it actually truly begin and end? Like, I mean, yes, we do know that during the Clinton administration, things went, like, more rightward for the National Democratic Party. But then it's like, wait, but does that mean necessarily, like, before then, they were all, like, left? No, because we know, like, Andrew Jackson was pretty right-wing. But technically, what he was considered right-wing is considered left-wing back in the day, considering he was a populist and advocated for equality for people. The terms are a little amorphous, but we generally understand how some people are considered more rightward and some people are considered more leftward. Especially in the US, like back then, it was literally mostly just like a campaign strategy. Like, who did you advocate for? So yeah, not only does the left and right spectrum adapt to the modern day and adapt to modern conditions, but it also adapts to, like, every single country. Considering we still use ideologies associated with the left and right spectrum, considering we still use ideas that have been associated with the left and right spectrum for a while, considering we still look at figures on the left and right, how can you honestly claim that the terms left and right are outdated? The answer to that question is very simple. Two things. People both don't know, or don't care, or just don't really, like, I just flat out want to lie about the terms, what they mean. Due to the amorphousnesses of them, there have been people that have been sort of, like, shifted a lot in regards to how certain things are. You know, like, again, like, a lot of people think of, oh, left and right means you're in favor of social issues. Ergo, anybody who's in favor of social issues is considered on the left. Which is how we get people who are legitimately center-right who claim that they are on the left. Like, globes. Like, everybody, like, I used to see this all the time. It's like globes and, like, socks and, like, rose emojis. And it's like, oh, these people are all, like, this shows how the online left is so fucking stupid. It's like, no, globes are not part of the left. Globes are not part of the left. They don't advocate for issues of equality and egalitarianism. Aside from literally just the social issues, they still are hardcore capitalists. They still have very rightward foreign policy takes. These guys, if literally, the only reason why they're not, like, hard right is literally just because they're gay or bi or something. And by that same token, like, libertarian, like, why do we understand that libertarians don't count on the left, but for some reason people still consider neoliberals part of the left? They like gay people. They are okay with certain drugs being legalized, but they also are both hardcore capitalists. Why do neoliberals somehow get included in the left, meanwhile libertarians don't? Especially considering foreign policy is the only difference between the two. One being non-interventionist, the other one being interventionist. But they both come at it from right-wing perspectives. Due to people not having an understanding of those terms, we get people who just throw them out willy-nilly. And I guess with that, we can just move into this one. The foreign policy issue, because there are a lot of people who also like to do this with foreign policy. Where they say, oh, because you're blank on foreign policy, like, because you do not in favor expansion, like, foreign policy, you are, by definition, a left-winger. When that is literally just so, it just doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't pass the sniff test. They like to interpret right-wing isolationism as left-wing, when it is literally just not. Let's look at it through that lens of the actual definitions again. Left-wing foreign policy seeks equality and egalitarianism. They view the US, or any other imperial power, as forcing imperialism across the world, enforcing a massive hierarchy on the worldwide populace, which they oppose because, again, they oppose hierarchies. Meanwhile, people on the right do not want to address issues in regards to hierarchies or United States imperialism. They only want to pull out of certain countries because either A, they view, like, the countries in a favorable manner, or B, they just view it as a financial waste. Right-wingers don't oppose NATO because, oh, it is this imperialist power that has forced all these worldwide nations to, like, go under the Western capitalist boot and blah, blah, blah. Like, they don't care about that. They want the world to go under the worldwide capitalist boot. They do. They legitimately do. They just don't want to do it that way because that way costs money and they have to spend it through tax dollars. They don't want to do that. And/or those will actually hurt them down the line because they're breeding terrorists around the world. Like, we get this a lot, where a lot of people who are on the online left have this outlook, oh, they hate the US empire, ergo, they're left-wing on the US empire issue. Even though it is very obvious that they have right-wing reasons for that point of view. Like, we get this sometimes, like, oh, Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene are out-lefting left on NATO. And it's like, no, they're not. They're not out-lefting the squad on NATO, because the squad views this NATO vote as them pushing to stop an imperial power from pushing its will on a person. Meanwhile, you are doing this because you want to suck the dick of the imperial power in question. Like, we have this in a lot of figures. Samir Khan, Jackson Kinkle, Maupin, Haas. They don't give a fuck about imperialism. They're literally supporting imperialism right now. The only reason that they don't support the US is because, not because of an actual imperialism issue, but because they support the imperialism of the other side. Samir Khan literally only opposes the US because of this whole, like, Western degeneracy thing, where she thinks the US is going to impose, like, gay rights on the Middle East. I mean, who cares if they do, but she is going at it from a right-wing perspective again. We're even seeing some people who are trying to make the claim that the GOP has gotten better on foreign policy because, oh, like, these guys are not neoconservative war hawks. They're, like, with Trump and all these new, like, conservatives, these guys are now anti, like, foreign intervention because, oh, they voted no on Syria. They voted no on this Ukraine bill, blah, blah, blah. But these literal exact same Republicans will then turn around and advocate for invading Mexico. These guys were touting the war horn on Trump trying to intervene in Venezuela. Because the fact of the matter is, non-interventionism and isolationism, it only goes so far. Like, a lot of isolationists and non-interventionists, they will, if there's a, like, spectrum or, like, a thing that they actually would support, they would support it. Like, a very infamous example was that Ron Paul gave money to a foreign, like thing, like a foreign coup in a certain country because a left, like, they're basically like two socialist parties that were arguing with each other over certain things, but one was, like, controlled by black people, one was controlled by white people, and Ron Paul gave money to the political party controlled by white people to try and do a coup. He's literally intervening in a foreign intervention. He's literally doing that because he benefited and he supported it. Like, oh, but he's like this principled leftist on this issue. And no segue, but this is really one that bothered me for a while. And this is a bit, like, tangent-y and, like, drama-y, but, like, Chad Wilson. Chad Wilson was one of the first examples that I saw of this that made me realize the left and right are literally just, like, the best terms to describe people. Even though he tried to be amorphous with the term as well, where he identified himself as a left-winger for a while, or a progressive for a while, and it's just like, I saw absolutely nothing indicating that he was on the left. And that's another reason why you should probably look at the terms a bit more critically, because there's some people who do use the terms left, or progressive, or socialist, or whatever, that just do not use the terms right. Like, he called himself left-wing, and I'm like, there's literally nothing in your platform that indicates that you are left-wing. You're not in favor of these, like left-wing economic issues. You're not in favor of certain things. Like, I don't get it. But one of the biggest things that shows that these left and right are outdated people, don't understand politics, is very evident by what they think they should replace the left and right spectrum is. Like, what they should replace it with. They always go, like, usually accompanied by that terminology is this: the true political spectrum is establishment versus populist. That's the real divide in our politics. That the populist right and the populist left can come together and we can fight the political establishment. And this has been touted by a lot of people in the so-called, like, populist left and populist right. You know, we got Sagar, Crystal Ball, Kyle Kalinske, Cenk Uygur, like, a lot of these people, and Jimmy Dore, like, a lot of them have this ideology. What this really is, of course, just an excuse for people on the left, or left, to then transition to have a rightward audience. Now, this is a thing that hasn't necessarily been new to politics around the world. We've had this a little bit in the past where we've had people who claim to like advocate for like both the left and the right, or people who advocate for like a left alliance and a right alliance. A very infamous example came from 1930s Germany, where the Communist Party of Germany tried to advocate for like more like nationalistic and like rightward rhetoric in order to appeal to Nazi voters. And due to that, they actually like openly formed alliances with the Nazi Party on a lot of regards, particularly to like try to take down the Social Democrats. And as we all know, that worked incredibly well. Not for the communists, obviously. No. This literally only benefited the right. This type of rhetoric always benefits the right. It never benefits the left, because the left is the one who ultimately has to make their concessions to appeal to the right. And, you know, what usually happens is you just get swallowed up by the right. That's what happens. Literally, in order to do this, you would have to just abandon a lot of your left-wing principles, because the right will never back you. They're not going to back you if you're pro-gay. They're not going to back you if you're pro-socializing certain things. They're not going to back you if you're in favor of they're not going to back you on those things. They're only going to back you if you come to them. And unfortunately, since people benefit both financially and politically from this, that's what happens. And a lot of this has sort of like exploded on the internet nowadays. And here's the thing. I think I can literally pinpoint exactly who to blame for this. I know exactly who we can blame for this outlook of populist versus establishment in regards to how the politics is viewed. And the person we can blame is David Fraser Nolan, founder of the American Libertarian Party and creator of the Nolan Chart. You may know the Nolan Chart, but if you don't know, let me explain. It was a political spectrum that David Nolan made in 1969. And it's a square, well, it's more of a diamond, but it's divided into 5 categories. And what it's supposed to do, it's supposed to measure how much freedom you espouse. On one side, you have personal freedom, which is where you have the left, liberal, and on the right, you have economic freedom, which is conservative. And the idea is, depending on how much you advocate for freedom in personal economics, depends on how far left or right you are put on the spectrum. But then, in the middle, there's the centrist category, which is basically just like you don't really have a stance on any of these issues. But then, on the top and bottom of the diamond, you have libertarian and authoritarian. Authoritarian means that you advocate for no personal freedom, no economic freedom. Essentially, code word communist. That's what he's trying to say. And libertarian means you advocate for personal freedom and economic freedom. Now you can get into sort of all the debates about why it's like a bad political compass. Like, how much economic freedom would you literally have in a libertarian society where you're spending most of it on amenities to keep you alive because those aren't guaranteed to you as rights? You are so totally free having to spend all of your paycheck on keeping your heating on. And then just the broad definition of the term authoritarian. It's like, that can mean a lot of different things. What do you mean by that? But the biggest complaint, that is the most glaring, obvious one that you can see, is it was made when the term libertarian in the United States wasn't a thing. Like, this wasn't a thing. He made this chart specifically to make libertarianism a thing in the United States. That's why he gave it a big, specific section all to itself on this chart. And he matched the chart with an accompanying quiz called the World's Smallest Political Quiz, with literally the intention that you would just fill out this quiz and then you would be forced to be driven closer to the libertarian ideology. He specifically built it so that libertarianism would be bigger than it actually was, and due to this sort of thing, that's what led the American Libertarian Party to kind of get bigger than it actually would have been otherwise. And this led to a lot of other political spectrums borrowing elements of this. The one in question that you are the most familiar with is the political compass, which basically took this but changed it a little bit. You see, rather than having libertarianism be its own section and authoritarianism as its own section, what they did was they took authoritarianism and libertarianism and they made it 2 sides of the coin, much like how the left and right are two sides of the coin, which would then divide the chart into 4 quadrants: authoritarian right, libertarian left, libertarian right, and authoritarian left, which took libertarianism and then changed it again. Originally, libertarian was its own ideology, but now it's actually 2 ideologies, libertarian left and libertarian right. They don't really give any distinction and explanation to understand that libertarian left doesn't necessarily mean libertarian party, or that libertarian left ideologies don't even really count as libertarian at all, because American libertarianism has shifted to the point where it is exclusively that yellow or purple quadrant. But it doesn't matter. Either way, you get drawn closer to libertarianism. There's even a large criticism of the political compass where it says, like, you have to say, like, the literal most extremely right-wing stuff to even remotely get put in that blue quadrant. And that sort of evolved to a lot of people. Like, a lot of people then took that outlook of politics and just said, oh, yeah, this is how it is now. A lot of people on the internet, I don't know if this isn't as popular nowadays, but originally people would take their political compass results and then, like, actually just make that their profile picture so that you just broadly understood, like, oh yeah, this is who they are on the spectrum. I was about to make another joke, but I decided against it. And some people then decided to take that and make it even more abstract. Rather than authoritarianism versus libertarianism, they're like, okay, yeah, like, once they do a little bit further analysis, they realize, oh yeah, okay, libertarian probably isn't the best word. It should probably be more like a populist or, like, whatever, like, anti-authoritarian, which is where we get that idea. It's actually one side versus the other, which is why we get the whole, like, left unity, right unity, lib unity, and auth unity, thinking, like, there's actually more broader agreement than you would actually think. When no, there isn't. Again, libertarian left and libertarian right have vastly different reasons for being down there. One, like, the only reason why a lot of libertarian left-rightists are down there is literally because they're gay. Like, that's probably the only reason why they're down there. Like, libertarian right-wingers, they don't care if gay people are oppressed or not. Further evidence is the fact that a lot of libertarians have jumped on the trend of the right-wing bandwagon against gay people. This, combined with a, like, developing youth that doesn't quite understand politics, and you get people who have this skewed perspective of how politics is. And it doesn't help that when you are young and you're sort of understanding how politics works, you sort of get into, like, weird phases. A lot of people nowadays, they just openly admit that they had a far-right phase in their politics. I never had one, but I can understand sort of the idea behind it, because far-right politics was just so prevalent online that it was just like you literally could not avoid it. The skeptic community was literally hitched to the far right so much that it was literally just like a lot of them just decided, okay, screw it, we'll just become part of them. Because their views of how politics was a lot different than the previous sort of people's analysis of politics. They thought that the authoritarians, in that sense, like back in the day, authoritarians were like, oh, the fascists or the communists. But now, the authoritarians are actually the blue-haired college kids who want a fat POC to be in Smash Bros. They are the true authoritarian, and that in actuality, they gotta stop them. And anybody who agrees with them is actually on the good side of the aisle. Again, with that whole analysis of like, oh, we're teaming up against the authoritarians. While I'm here, I guess you should probably wonder, what are my thoughts on the political compass? I guess I'll just say it right now so that you understand. The political compass is the best way to analyze the political spectrum in a visual manner. But it is still flawed because the political spectrum should not be measured in a visual manner. Like the political compass, with a lot of people like hitching themselves to the political compass, we see things that are just like, they just make no sense. Like a lot of things is that we see people take the political compass and then literally just put ideologies in the political compass. When it's like, no, that's not how it works. How can you legitimately go left libertarianism? Like, the whole quadrant is called left libertarian. How can you put left libertarianism inside of the libertarian left category? Isn't that the whole quadrant? The political spectrum is not supposed to be a graph or a chart. And that's, again, one of the major confusions. It is not supposed to be represented in a visual manner. It is supposed to be an abstract thought. And again, it grows, it changes, and develops. What is considered left and right will not necessarily be considered left and right in the future. And everybody sort of has like a little, like even though everybody generally agrees about the left and right, there are some elements and differences on what's considered left and right to individual people. For example, some people look at me and then they go, he is far left. And then there's some people who look at me and say I am center left. And there are some people who look at me and don't even consider me left wing at all. The last group of people are just absolute idiots. But the other side of the people who are like put me on the left spectrum, but don't necessarily know where to put me, they kind of like, it's like, yeah, how can you honestly place me next to anybody else and then consider, oh, I am exactly to the left of this person, or I'm exactly to the right of this person? Like, you can't necessarily do that. Broadly, you can, but for the most part, no, you can't really do that. Especially when you got people who consider themselves center-left that still identify as capitalist. Like, and I don't mean like, oh, social democratic. Like, no, capitalist. Exactly how can you measure me on a spectrum with other people who are left-wing and then legitimately go, oh yeah, he's objectively far left compared to him, or whatever. Like, I mean, you can generally get it. Like, if you know my positions or whatever else, you can generally understand that. But you can't necessarily go, okay, this person is to the left of this person, and this person's to the left of this person, and this person. No, you're to the right of this person. Like, put me in a room with a bunch of people who are like left wing, and you can broadly get what we are. Like, for example, the Social Democrats would probably be considered to the right of most of us. But then it's like, oh, maybe the communists get put to the left of us. But like, wait, what type of communists? Because that's where you get into a little bit of a interesting thing. Again, to looking back at the political compass, the 4 quadrants are essentially supposed to be shorthands for 4 ideologies. Authoritarian left is supposed to be communism. Authoritarian right is supposed to be Nazism or fascism. Libertarian left is considered anarchism. And libertarian right is considered anarcho-capitalism. Which would make sense on paper, except there's one major problem. In order to get into the category that is supposed to be a shorthand for communists, you have to be very explicitly anti-gay. You have to be very explicitly right-wing on a lot of social issues. You have to be very explicitly socially reactionary. So by that token, there are going to be very few communists that are actually put in the communist category. And I know this, I did this because when I did the episode for the 10 political parties of the United States, when I put them on a spectrum, the Populist Party is considered in the red quadrant, but they're not communist by any means. But it just so happens that they have more reactionary views on certain social issues. The only communists that would be, the only people that would be put in that category are MAGA communists or third positionists, neither of which I would consider left-wing by any stretch of the word. Like, generally, any sort of political spectrum quiz that actually tries to put you on a spectrum, like a literal visual spectrum, are probably wrong. The political compass is the only one that could actually make you kinda fit in your category, but it's only on a base level. You only get it for a vague understanding of your politics. Like, I don't want to see people going, I'm actually negative 7.8 and plus 7. Like, I don't want that. Like, I don't want that. That is stupid. This is the only parts of it that makes somewhat sense. Like, all you need to know is which quadrant are you in, how deep are you, and left and right. Like, those are basically the only things that are actually visually needed for that. Like, that's the only helpfulness in it. Like, I'm in the libertarian left quadrant. That makes the most sense to me. And all the ideologies that are associated with that, like, fit. I don't need to know, like, I don't need to know the exact percentage points. I don't need to know, like, what specific ideology you're going to put me in on that. Like, those are 2 different quizzes. Like, if you want an ideology quiz, then do that. Not a political spectrum quiz. Those are better. Like the ones that give you ideologies. But I don't even just want that. I want ones that give you multiple ideologies to look into. Left values quiz. And, what's the one? The one where it gave you, like, a ton of ones. Those are the only ones that make the most sense. Like, if they want to give you ideologies to work with. Those are the only ones that make the most sense for political spectrum quizzes. And now back to more criticism of this sort of populism versus establishment political spectrum. Again, Just flat out wrong. This is sort of like the broad continuation of the idea of like, oh, the populists on both sides of the aisle need to work together. That is just flat out wrong. Like, you know, we've seen this before. Red-Brown Alliance, Strass rights, whatever the hell. Like, we've seen this before where, like, people on the right and left, populist side, try to, quote-unquote, work together. But again, only benefits the right wing and just doesn't make sense. I have a full podcast about it already where I talk crap about the whole, like, populist alliance. But let's go over some things about it again. Biggest criticism of it that I have, that I'll just say here, populism, not an ideology. It's a rhetoric style for certain types of politics. They agree on problems, but not solutions, and any true ideologues of the group would not form an actual political alliance. When a left-winger says that the bankers are the problem, and a right-winger says the bankers are a problem, they're usually talking about two different things. And again, I should say usually. Sometimes there's overlap. But those are people that I wouldn't necessarily trust on the left side of the aisle either, if that's what they mean by that. When they both denounce a foreign war, they are advocating for two different viewpoints in regards to it. The left-winger probably advocates for the worldwide powers to not intervene in certain countries' politics, affairs, or wars, probably against it in favor of like, oh, you're doing this for oil, so ergo, this is bad because we believe that oil is bad for the world. Or they might say, oh, we support this socialist group within this country and you're trying to fight against it. Meanwhile, right-wing non-interventionists and isolationists don't care about any of that. They don't want to do it because it costs money. Voting similar on a bill due to overlapping interests is one thing. An actual alliance is never going to happen. Like, I mean, we see this all the time. Like, we get some, like, Republicans that vote for, like, a squad-sponsored bill to pull out of Afghanistan or pull out of whatever. That doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean they agree on the issue. They agree on something, but it's not necessarily the issue. AOC, Ilhan Omar, of course, would disagree with it on the stance of imperialism or whatever. Meanwhile, Gates or Marjorie Taylor Greene just doing it because money, money, money. And money could also be an issue for for the squad and stuff, but also they want to then use that money to help benefit people. The right wing doesn't want that money to be used any other way. They don't want that money to be gone to anything else. The next reason why that's stupid, the establishment is not the same in every country. Now, again, I guess we gotta go a little bit in definitions. What the heck is the establishment? Well, the establishment is an intentionally vague term that describes the dominant social group, elite, or political rulers of a nation. The definitions can vary from person to person. Some say the establishment is the politicians in power and the ideology in question. Some say it's like something deeper, like the deep state, or a secret cabal of certain types of people. They could mean the rich or whatever else. And, well, you see, this is the thing. Every country has a friggin' different type of establishment. Like, for example, who is considered the establishment in the, in the pink tide nations? Who is considered the establishment? I mean, who is it? Like, legitimately, tell me. Who is considered the establishment in pink tide nations? Do you still consider the rich and the powerful as the establishment, or the actual, Latin American socialist nations and leaders that actually get elected? Like, for example, Venezuela. Like, who's the political establishment in Venezuela? Looking at it, who controls Venezuela? I don't think it's the capitalists that control Venezuela or the rich that control Venezuela. The establishment is Chavez, is Maduro, is Pisu. Who's the establishment in Russia? Not the oligarchs, not the rich people. Putin's the one calling all the shots there. Who is considered the establishment in each of these nations? And from the looks of it, it seems that most people would probably agree they're probably different people. And then one of the funniest ways you can look at this is this. Let's just say this. Okay. The populist right and the populist left, they work together. They fight the establishment, and they win. They beat the establishment at their game. They become the presidents. They become the leaders. The establishment is defeated in every single way possible. What the hell does that make you? Guess what, buddy? You are the establishment now. You're the one in charge. You're the one with the power. You are the establishment. what the heck now? Do we call on more people to replace you? And then what? Do they establish this? Do they do the same thing to you? Like, I don't get it. Yeah, it's just so stupid. Just like these intentionally. How could you actually legitimately go, okay, the left, right, these terms are too vague. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a new spectrum. And the spectrum is going to use even worse, more vague terms. Ones that are way more amorphous and are way more confusing to people. So yeah, to summarize it again, left and right, not outdated. They are very much in date. And any other analysis of left and right is just stupid. If you want to make your case, by all means, you can leave it in the comments. You're going to be wrong. You're going to get humiliated in the comment section. But, you know, you can still make a case. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the bell to notify when the future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.